Hair is considered to be what is called dead keratinized cells. So the process of keratinization has concluded by the time we reached the hair. Hair itself is pretty amazing. There are millions all over our skin. But there are certain places where we do not have hair, and those places will include the palms of our hands, soles of our feet, the lips, nipples, and also portions of the external genitalia. Some of the important functions of skin include the fact that it warns us of insects on the skin, and this is really the main function that we see in humans. The others are important, but this is probably the most important of them. Other functions of skin are going to include the hair on the head guarding us against physical trauma, protection from heat loss, and also shielding the skin from sunlight. Because that sunlight, especially the ultraviolet radiation, can damage that DNA. So it's very important to make sure you wear that hat when you're out on a hot summer day. So let's look at the structure of a hair. A hair itself, the shaft that is sticking out, is what is referred to as a long filament. The word hair actually is derived from the word pilus. So, in plural, hairs are called pili. They are flexible strands of, again, dead keratinized cells. And where this hair is originally produced is in what are called hair follicles. And hair follicles are invaginations from the epidermis. So you've already learned about the epidermis, and what this essentially means is that we see the epidermis and it folds inward, and that folding inward is what surrounds a hair follicle. So the hair follicle itself would be located in this area. So there are such things as hard keratin as well as soft keratin, which is found in the skin. And there's certainly advantages for hard keratin over soft keratin. For one thing, it's tougher and more durable, and the cells do not flake off like they do in soft keratin. Recall back to the stratum corneum that you've already learned about. It's going to slough off or flake off as it's replaced by deeper layers of the epidermis. So the regions of the hair, there's two predominant regions called the shaft and the root. So these are the chief regions. And the shaft itself is what is going to extend above the scalp where the keratinization is complete. The root is within the scalp, and that's where keratinization is still going on. The three parts of the shaft are the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. The medulla has a central core of large cells and air spaces. The cortex has several layers of flattened cells surrounding the medulla. And the cuticle is the outermost layer. And this is where we find occasionally split ends, and it's mostly completely keratinized. So I'll write completely keratinized here. The hair pigments are quite interesting. The hair pigments are made by the melanocytes in the hair follicles. And they're a combination of different melanins. So there could be yellow, rust, brown, or black melanins that create all the hair colors. One thing that's interesting is when somebody has red hair, that's determined by a special pigment, which is called pheomelanin. And when the melanin is then produced and replaced by air bubbles, so this would be later on in life, this is when we get the gray-white hair. It results from melanin production decreased, a decrease of melanin, and air bubbles that replace melanin in the shaft. So let's look at some images of the hair. So remember, really, the hair is going to be technically defined as an organ because it has multiple types of tissues within it. So when we look at a cross section here of a hair follicle, what I want you to notice is we have those regions of the hair, the inner medulla, cortex, and cuticle. Remember, there's no images on the exams. It will be only on your lab exams. But what I want you to see is there is an epithelial layer that's touching it. This is that invagination that I spoke of the epidermis. And then outside of that is a connective tissue layer. To the right-hand side of this diagram, we see a cross-section of a hair and hair follicle as well. So you can see the melanocytes at the bottom. We have the hair root with the medulla cortex as well as the cuticle, and then also an epithelial sheet surrounded by a connective tissue sheet. So essentially, we have multiple types of tissue here. We have epithelial tissue, we have connective tissue, we're going to have nerves that are going to wrap around it, and there's also a muscle, which we'll talk about next, called the erector pili muscle. So again, remember the definition of an organ is that it has several types of tissues in it. So the structure of the hair follicle is what is going to extend from the epidermal surface to the dermal surface. The hair bulb is an expanded area at deep ends of the follicles. And the hair follicle receptor, which is also called the root plexus, is a group of sensory nerve endings that wrap around the bulb. So the word plexus is new to you, and it's a collection of nerves. We're going to deal with this later on in the semester. It could also be a collection of blood vessels, as in it's called in the brain. So hair itself is considered a sensory touch receptor. This makes sense if you've ever had your hair pulled upon. That certainly activates a stimulus that goes to the nervous system. The hair matrix is an actively dividing area of bulb that produces hair cells. And then the muscle that I spoke of is the erector pili muscle. It's a smooth muscle attached to the follicle, and it's responsible for goosebumps. The hair papilla then is the dermal tissue containing a knot of capillaries that supplies nutrients to growing hair. And there are a couple different types of hair that we have. There's what's called villus hair and terminal hair. Villus hair is the smooth kind of hair, fine body hair that's on children and adult females, whereas terminal hair is much more coarse, long hair, and it's found on scalp and eyebrows. So think of those older men that you see that have coarse eyebrows that are kind of sharp. That's an example of terminal hair. And those, interestingly enough, are grown in response to androgens. And in our next video, we're going to see a disorder where this actually happens in females. So what occurs at puberty is that this appears in the axillary and pubic areas of both sexes, also on the face and neck of males. And as you would guess, nutrition and hormones affect the hair growth. And follicles grow in cycles. There's active and regressive cycles of follicular growth. So we've discovered that there are 90 scalp hairs lost daily.